Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're looking at the car industry and the coming collapse that it's going to go through. If you invest in any of the legacy automakers, you may want to double check those holdings, because the next 10 to 15 years is going to absolutely wreck the car industry. Unlike the propaganda that legacy automakers have been pushing to everyone, the transition to electric vehicles is going to shift the entire industry. It's going to shake up all the existing players, and some may not even come out the other side. And if you ask my opinion, I don't think many automakers are going to survive the EV transition. The auto industry is moving fast right now, faster than any of the legacy automakers have had to deal with for decades. The last time the auto industry saw this much rapid movement was after World War II. If you think the US automakers got smashed when they opened the floodgates to the Japanese auto sector, then this is going to be an entirely new front. At least when the US started allowing Japanese car makers to sell in the country, they were making the same type of cars as the US automakers. But this time it's not just an increase in efficiency or production, it's the next evolution of what we define as a car. And don't get me wrong, this is a fantastic thing for consumers, and a terrifying time for legacy automakers. Not only will our cars not try to give our kids asthma, but some of the cars that are now being prototyped are going to change our idea of what a car is and what it can do. And it's time we look at the current automakers and actually consider whether they will survive the EV transition. Because if you don't remember, they didn't handle 2008 very well. And that was just an economic recession. At that time, the auto industry wasn't even changing all that quickly. Now we're entering a phase where debt is more expensive, labor has been tight, and any automaker that's going to make the change to electric vehicles is going to have to completely reinvent its company from the ground up. And if you haven't seen the record levels of debt that the automakers have been piling up, especially if you're holding any of their stocks in your portfolios, you're going to want to take a second look at those debt levels. It's actually quite shocking. Whether you take a look at Ford, General Motors, Toyota, or Volkswagen, even those giants of traditional car makers are accumulating record levels of debt. Compare that to the lightly indebted and highly agile Tesla, it's not painting a pretty picture. Ford has a market valuation of about $50 billion. Which isn't too bad. However, they have almost $90 billion in long-term debt. So if Ford sold itself at its current valuation, it would barely pay off half its debt. Not to mention on top of that, Ford and every other legacy automaker is going to have to write off most of their assets. Because the big question is, who would actually buy them? If you're watching the auto industry switch to electric, would you buy a manufacturing plant that was made and designed to assemble combustion engines? Not to mention all the research and development, as well as any patents for combustion engines and transmissions would be essentially useless now. As automakers change to electric vehicles, they're not going to buy all that legacy equipment. And keep in mind, Ford is not the only one with this issue. Nearly every legacy automaker is stacked with debt. Not to mention within a decade or two, they're going to have tens if not hundreds of billions of dollars of assets and equipment that are going to be useless. With the only benefit being that some of the warehouses and factory buildings can be repurposed. And to add insult to injury, most automakers are not making the prime product of their future vehicles, the battery. Currently, every legacy automaker is buying batteries off the shelf and slapping them into a car they previously designed. The innovation has been minimal. Like, this actually blows my mind. You think you can transition to be an EV maker without batteries? And have you noticed that legacy automakers keep showing off electric car models and they don't ever have them on lots? Yeah, it's because they don't have the batteries to put in them. The Chevy Bolt, for example, is a relatively small electric vehicle, which means it has a relatively small battery. There are still hardly any available Bolts on any of the Chevy lots, and this car has been in production for 2 years now. Not to mention, due to the lack of engineering, they've been recalled twice just for the battery. And I know it's not technically GM's Ultium platform, but the Ultium platform isn't a battery. It's just a battery pack, one that still needs to be filled with LG's battery cells. And because most of the battery manufacturing is currently done in China, which is likely to be banned from most Western countries, this leaves a very small amount of battery makers that every other automaker is going to have to purchase from. This is going to give them a lot of pricing power. And if that pricing power with the battery cells ends up affecting the car sticker price, that'll give companies like Tesla a major advantage. And by no means I'm not trying to be a Tesla fanboy right now, but Tesla does have a 10-year head start. 10 years, and the other automakers are not going to be able to catch that up anytime soon. And for the most part, all the legacy automakers are building the biggest electric cars they could possibly make. The Hummer EV, the Ford F-150, the Chevy Silverado, the Chevy Blazer, the Chevy Equinox, the newly revealed Ram truck. All of these are giant platforms that are going to require giant batteries. And none of the automakers have any way of building these. The Europeans, Japanese, and Korean automakers have taken a much more conservative approach, with the Kia EV6, the Volkswagen ID Buzz, and the yet-to-be produced Toyota BE4, BEZ4, something like that. Can we go back to naming vehicles, using real words? It seems like legacy automakers are spending more time on vehicle design than actually getting the core technology to build them. Compare that to Tesla, who's only designed 4 models in the last 10 years. While they have put a lot of engineering and design into those models, they've spent most of their time trying to figure out how to build the batteries and how to build cars better in general. And the thing is, it shouldn't be that complicated. Let's imagine you can make 100 battery packs. What is the point of having 10 different models when you can only make 10 of each? You would need 10 different assembly lines, all with duplicate workers, staff, managers, and parts. Or you could produce 2 vehicles and produce 50 of each. You have now reduced the number of assembly lines by 80%. Congratulations, thanks to your ability to do basic math, you are now promoted. And that's not even to mention the crippling amount of debt they all have. The only thing right now that would save the legacy car makers from absolutely getting crushed by Chinese automakers is the fact that their national governments are going to block them from even entering. Excluding Tesla, that is. Which is the only car maker outside of China that is actually able to compete with the Chinese EV makers. Because if it wasn't for Tesla, there wouldn't be a single Western automaker within the top 4. And the sad part is, if Tesla didn't exist for the last 10 years, the traditional automakers would be even further behind than they currently are. The only reason they're moving into EVs right now is because Tesla is finally gaining market share. Can you imagine if Tesla didn't exist? The legacy automakers would still be making those crap hybrids and calling it a good day's work. And I'm not hating on any hybrid owners out there. I just find hybrids to be a compromise. Specifically the standard hybrid. I actually believe the plug-in hybrid was a missed opportunity. One that would have allowed the traditional automakers to start building batteries in low volumes while still making their standard cars. But unfortunately with the plug-in hybrids, they still treated them as a traditional combustion engine car. And by that I just mean, instead of treating the engine like a generator, they treated the battery like an assistant to the engine. Because despite what the big automakers are saying, the battery shortage is not going to end anytime soon. It probably won't even end in the next decade. So while they're buying overly priced off-the-shelf battery cells, Tesla will actually be making affordable cars. Even if the legacy automakers are able to produce their electric cars, they are going to have to fight with their dealers to not mark them up because of the shortage. And that's not to mention the other EV makers that are going to be eating at their heels. While these other smaller EV makers don't hold a candlestick to the likes of Tesla right now, they are filling in a lot of small niches that are going to eat at the big players. Rivian is challenging Ford in the SUV and truck market, which is also a jab to General Motors and Ram, and possibly a little with Jeep too. You have companies like Lucid, which aren't very competitive right now, but they will be competing in the luxury market against the likes of Mercedes-Benz and Cadillac. And then you have the quirky but genius little companies like Canoo, who will likely be competing with the lifestyle vehicles like Subaru and Jeep as well. And while most of these small EV makers also have to buy their batteries off the shelf, they don't have the tens of billions of dollars of debt hanging over their head. Nor do they have the baggage of legacy outdated systems that have no purpose anymore. I don't know which one will go first, nor do I know how many will survive, but I can almost make a guarantee that not all the traditional automakers are going to come out on the other side of the EV revolution. They're not going to be able to make this transition. They're not innovating, they're not reimagining how they build cars, and they're crippled by debt and legacy systems. Think about all the automakers that currently exist right now and consider whether they'll actually be able to make the transition. Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, Honda, Toyota, Kia, Hyundai, Subaru, Suzuki, Mazda, and so many more I'm probably forgetting right now. And each of those automakers that falls off the list will make it easier for the others to survive, but only by so much. Because at the end of the day, all of these companies are going to be trying to avoid bankruptcy, which means they're going to have to slap a markup on all of their cars, just to pay the interest on their staggering debts. Compare that to the startup EV makers that don't have any debt and are still able to raise money from capital investors. Not to mention that Tesla doesn't even really need to make a profit on their cars right now. They could sell them at break even just to put pressure on the other automakers. Because if General Motors, Volkswagen, and Toyota don't make a profit, they're going to default on their debts, and then they'll have to declare bankruptcy. If Tesla doesn't make a profit, all they do is annoy their shareholders. That's a pretty big difference. And that is going to be a crippling weight as these automakers transition. And while I am excited about the transition to electric vehicles, I'm not going to enjoy legacy car makers, some being 100 years old and having rich and long histories, most of which are the respective titans of their country. I'm not going to be excited to watch them go bankrupt, but I don't see any way all of the automakers are going to make the transition. But let me know what you all think. Am I overly pessimistic? Do you think your favorite automaker is going to survive the transition? Do you think old Big Auto has the ability to reinvent itself? Or do you think the natural selection of capital markets is going to root out the weak players? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like the content we make, be sure to like, subscribe, and keep watching The Daily Dollar.